California.
What's up, Bears fans? Welcome back to another edition of the Willis Twin Towers podcast. As always, guys, before we start this video, please, like I said, as always, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, give us all a follow. You can follow us all on X or Twitter. I am @_Jeff Willis. Tim over here on my left is @TimWillis24, and you can follow our executive producer Aldo Gandia @Barroom Network. So before we get started here, guys, like I said, this is my partner here on my left, Tim. There's a lot of stuff that's been going on right now with the combine just starting up. Before I dig into everything, I want to mention I wish our show would have started after the offensive line measurements and stuff, because I want to see how some of those guys, how their length grades out, how they run and all that stuff. So it's unfortunate our show is before that, but in any case, we'll dig into what we have seen. We'll we'll talk a little bit about what we might expect to see with some of those guys coming up. And any thoughts you guys have, as always, please feel free to throw them in the chat. Any questions you have, we'll try to answer them. You guys help us drive the show. So please do that, and we'll do our best to answer them. So why don't you introduce yourself, Tim, and get us rolling here.
What's up, guys? Good to see you again. Gotta be honest, I'm pretty bummed about Trey Smith, but it is what it is. It's not like I should have guaranteed that he was going to end up with the Bears anyway. We saw this last year with Daron Payne. Everybody got all excited about him, and then he ends up getting tagged and re-signed. So a little bit of a bummer, because I really was hoping for him. But there are other options. There's other guys to look for. I'm not going to let it taint, the rest of this offseason. I trust the process and who they're going to bring in. Good line coach here now. Good offensive coordinator / head coach, obviously. We'll see where this goes, but there's a ton of really good draft options. This is a really deep guard class, in my opinion, especially in the early rounds. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen, but it opens up free agency, certainly. Gives us some options on the offensive line, gives us some options on the defensive line. I think that's where we have to attack fast and hard in the free agency period, is those two spots. It's got to be trenches. And then that leaves you open. Like I've said on this show many times, I am most certainly a draft the best available need on the board. So that's where I'm hoping for, or that's what I'm hoping for. And hopefully free agency can get us in that direction. But it remains to be seen what happens. We'll get into all that. Some of the guys that are available in free agency. We'll get into some of the draft prospects, and we'll give you guys. Go ahead.
Just a quick note, Tim. As far as Trey Smith, Aldo makes a good point here. I want to address this real fast because for those of you who don't know, they put the non-exclusive franchise tag, the Chiefs did, on Trey Smith. So what that means is he can still negotiate with other teams. However, if another team signs him, like the Bears, and the Chiefs don't match that contract, which they do have an opportunity to do that. So if they match, they retain the rights to the player. If they choose not to match the contract, then the Bears or the other team that trades for him would owe 2 first-rounders to the Chiefs, which is something that most teams are not likely to do. That's why you always say there is a chance if somebody really wants the guy bad enough. I don't know that the Bears are in a spot right now where they need to be trading away 2 of their first-round picks for this guy. I think they're further away than that. So I love Trey Smith. I would have loved to see him on the team. I think at this point it's that ship has sailed. So they kind of got to regroup and find a different way to go. And before I switch it back over to you, Tim, speaking of the franchise tag, this is one of those situations where this is I don't want to say a weapon, but it's a tool for teams who are in smaller markets. That's what it's designed for. I was having a conversation with some people earlier about this in a group chat. Basically, for a smaller market team, let's say you're the Bengals, for instance, and this is the example I used before. So a smaller market team like Cincinnati, they don't have like the media coverage. They don't have the endorsements. They don't have the marketing value of the merchandise sales of a team in like Chicago or New York, right? So think about it from the perspective of Cincinnati. Let's say a random player A, right? Player A has been there for 4 years. He's due for a contract, and they put the franchise tag on him to see what his value is. Another team tries to sign this guy away. Now, let's assume that the franchise tag didn't have draft capital attached to it. This is why it has draft capital attached to it, by the way. So let's say it doesn't, okay? No draft capital attached. Another team swoops in and they sign this team or sign this player from Cincinnati. Let's say it's Chicago or a New York team, okay? They sign into a big contract. Cincinnati can't match it. That's another discussion for another day that I don't want to get into right this second. But let's just say they don't match it for whatever reason. They can't match it for whatever reason. They lose the player. Now they lose the player for basically nothing. They might get a 3rd round comp pick next year from a team, for a team that signs into a big contract, but that's the best they can do. Whereas with the franchise tag, with that draft compensation attached to it, it's less likely that they are going to, number one, lose that player. And number two, if they do lose that player, they're going to get significant compensation back for it. And again, this is designed to help those smaller market teams. So whether it works or not, again, that's another discussion. That's the idea behind it, though. So, again, it's unfortunate that this is the case with Smith. I would love the Bears to have a chance at him. But, again, I think that ship has sailed. But, sorry, Tim, go ahead and continue with your point.
I was just mentioning that we will get into some of these free agents and some of these draft prospects. I think we definitely need to look at positions of need more than anything else. So, we can narrow this down. We certainly need to look at interior offensive linemen, all across the defensive line, although I think really we need one end and one Andrew Billings look-alike, I guess you could say, or comp. We need another big body that's hard to move and that can close gaps there. And certainly I've mentioned before, I think we need a safety. We're in the last year of, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name. Corner, Kevin Byard, sorry. And
safety.
And like I've said many times, I'm not sure Jaquan Brisker is past this year or even playing this year. I don't know. Everything I heard, he's healthy, but who knows? I mean, that's, and he's certainly, if I'm not mistaken, he's missed more games than he's played in his 3 seasons in Chicago. So, again, I think safety is a bigger need than people are saying it is. And it remains to be seen where we're at with corner too. Is Tyreek going to be the guy? We'll see. But we have several needs. Those are just, obviously the trenches is number one. Everybody knows that. That's nothing new for any of you. So Jeff, why don't we go ahead and get started? Let's look at this free agent class. So there's some guards still available. Obviously, probably 2 that you have all heard about already. The top 2, in my opinion, that are available at this moment are Will Fries of Indianapolis and Mekhi Becton of Philadelphia. Those are the 2, probably the top 2 available outside of Trey Smith, which he's not going to be available. I don't even want to get into all that. That would require you to give up first-round draft capital for Trey Smith. I knew they were going to pull something like that. They did it last year with Snead. And people bite on it all the time because they're going to get bullied by Kansas City. Now, in this case, I doubt that happens because the team is going to have to give up 2 first-round picks. So I don't see that happening in this scenario because if I'm not mistaken, he's getting the non-exclusive franchise tag.
Yes, I said earlier.
So, again, that would leave us the guards that are available, Fries and Becton. Those are my top 2. If you actually look at Will Fries' season, he was really, really good this year. He's kind of backwards from what the Bears have looked for recently. He's not quite as high of a grader in the run game, but his pass protection is excellent. So
here's my issue with, I believe it's pronounced Freeze, by the way. Here's my issue with Freeze. He only played 5 games last year, and he broke his leg, and he was out the rest of the season. I mean, a broken leg is, I guess it's not the end of the world, but it's a broken leg and an offensive lineman at that. So a guy who really needs to use his legs and his leverage to his advantage. So is he going to be ready for the start of the season? If he is, I don't hate it. I mean, The problem with it is they need to know now. Like if he's good to go, he's good to go. And I believe Greg was talking about this the other day. Somebody else, some other player, I believe it's Aiden Hutchinson. He was making the reference to. Hutchinson had the same injury, broke his tibia and his fibula, actually, I believe. And he was out, or he's been out, and he's expected back before the season starts, I believe. So Greg was basically saying he thinks that Freeze should be ready with, plenty of time for training camp and all that. It remains to be seen. It's like I said, it's a broken leg. Chances are after, he got hurt in week 5, so it should heal by then, I would imagine. He's had some up and down play before last season. He did play really well last season, like Tim said, when he did play in those 5 games. So he's a guy I would not mind having. It's an upgrade. The one guy you didn't mention, Tim, that I do want to bring up is a former lineman who makes a ton of sense. A guy who played under Ben Johnson and Kevin Zeitler. This guy, he's old. There's no doubt about that. He's an older guy. He's well into his 30s by now. He's not a long-term solution, but I don't think he needs to be a long-term solution. And I'll get into that in a minute too. A guy like Zeitler.
Correct me if I'm wrong. There was I don't know if it was a report, but there was something out there today about Zeitler or rumor wanting to go to the Bears. I don't know how true that is, but obviously the connection is there. So
it's one of those random accounts that you just can't trust anything from that. So it's a rumor. I never put any. Greg talks about this all the time. Aldo talks about this all the time. I never put any kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Any kind of
merit.
Yeah, I don't give any merit to anybody who I don't know is a significant, reliable source.
Agree.
And there are several of them out there, and Rappaport, Schefter, there's plenty of guys out there who are reputable sources. And just in Chicago, there's plenty of them. Biggs, Courtney Cronin, Hogue, all these guys, Herb Howard, been on our show multiple times. Great reporter. There's plenty of people who have good sources out there and who know what they're talking about. So when they say something, I believe it. Now, something like that, you can see where the speculation comes from, and I was just getting ready to get to that. Obviously, he played in Detroit under Ben Johnson. It would make sense for him to want to continue to play for Ben Johnson. I don't think it's going to cost an arm and a leg to get a guy who's older and a veteran. He still plays well. He's an upgrade over anything they had last year. He can step in and be, at the very least, a stopgap player for at least 1 year. He signed a 1-year deal. I'm thinking maybe he's 7 to 10 million, 8 million, something like that. I think they could do it for. Get this guy, maybe a little more than that, but still, you bring the guy and he's a stopgap starter. It's well worth a starting player. So let him do that. Let him come in. And another thing that I've mentioned before too is I think he can be a leader, a guy who can step in. He's a veteran. He can show the offensive line how, and really the rest of the offensive room, how Ben Johnson wants to do things. He can help everybody learn, and on top of that, he knows how to play ball, so they can learn some of that from him too. I just think it makes a ton of sense for a guy like that. Like I said, he's not a long-term solution. But again, the draft is I think there's a lot of really intriguing interior offensive line prospects, especially in the first 2 rounds, which is why I think the Bears are really going to attack that position in that area of the draft early with, their early picks. Even if they address the positions in free agency, I still think they're going to attack it hard because of that fact, because they have that capital to do that, and they have a deep class here in that area. So my biggest thing is that they haven't really invested much high significant draft capital in the offensive line in the past 3 drafts outside of Darnell Wright. I mean, Karan was a 3rd round pick, but I want to see them use some more day 1 and early day 2 picks on O linemen. And I think they're going to do that this year. So Zeitler gives you a perfect opportunity to do that. Yeah. A guy doesn't have to be ready to come in and start right now. You can develop him a little bit under Zeitler, and he should be ready by next year. And he's a nice little stopgap for you. Again, he can help your offensive line and the rest of your offense learn how to play under Ben Johnson. He's going to be a good leader for you, and he's going to get the job done. So I think it's a perfect fit. I like him. I think it makes even more sense now that Trey Smith is gone. So, or I should say off the market for the most part. So I just think it makes a ton of sense. I don't know. I was surprised that nobody's really brought him up. I hear a lot of people talking about Becton and Freeze. Becton kind of scares me. I mean, I obviously understand why they would draft or why they would bring him in. I just think with the case of Becton is he was very underwhelming as a tackle in New York with the Jets. I mean, it's the Jets. They don't do a very good job of developing players in the first place. But he goes to Philly. They move him to guard, and he had a really good year there this year on the right side. Now, granted, he was playing next to Lane Johnson and Cam Jurgens. So overall, the Eagles have one of the very best, if not the best, offensive lines in football. He's going to play well in that scenario, you would think, or at least he's going to play better than he has. My fear, I guess, is if the Bears were to go and get him as he kind of regresses back to the player he was, if he doesn't have that kind of help around him, which the Bears don't at this moment. That could change, but that's kind of where it is at this moment. So I just think that's why I think Zeitler makes the most sense. I think, again, he's older and he's not a long-term solution, but I love the prospect of that. I love the idea of that for the Bears. And again, why would you not want a guy with familiarity with Johnson? What do you think? Like I said, I think he makes sense.
Well, first, I want to thank Maddie for the $2 donation. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. The network certainly appreciates that. And he makes a good point here. We need tone setters. That's 100% accurate. And that's something that I feel like Ryan Poles has done a much better job of acquiring some of those tone setters. The problem is the talent and the tone setting didn't mirror or didn't marry. And that's something that I feel that has to happen from this point forward. A guy that isn't being talked about a lot, Jeff, that I personally like, his grades aren't that great, but if you go watch the tape, he's a pretty freaking good football player, and that's Aaron Banks in San Francisco. Yeah. That would be a much cheaper guard option to bring in. Notre Dame grad, mind you. We love our Notre Dame guys. And let's face reality, guys. Notre Dame offensive linemen are very good in the NFL. They just are. The majority of if they get drafted, they typically have success in the NFL.
Not Sam Mustipher. Sam Mustipher wasn't worth it. He's not worth it.
Well, no, that's actually not true. Sam Mustipher only in Chicago because he was pretty good in Baltimore. So that's really just Chicago that he wasn't good. But yeah, for the most part, and Sam Mustipher also wasn't drafted. He was an undrafted free agent. So
that's true too.
But as far as the guys who have been drafted, they've all had pretty successful NFL careers. You can thank Harry Heastan for a lot of that. He kind of built a really good culture there. And and Jay Grizz makes an excellent point here. O-linemen and the tight ends. Notre Dame has always been known as tight end U. Between them and Miami and Iowa, those are like the three big schools for tight ends. And it's that's something that if you're looking for a player at a position on the offensive line, and you see that Notre Dame under the college, that's a pretty good bet that they're going to be pretty good. So I do like him a lot. He would be a lot cheaper than those other guys, probably even cheaper than Zeitler, since Zeitler's had a really good career to this point. He's an aging veteran. He's still playing at a high level, even though he's 35 years old. Maybe you're looking for a cheaper option, and then you can bring in your possibly center in free agency as well, which we'll get to in a second. And Jay Grizz, I'll answer your question real quick, or not your question, but you said Ronnie Stanley, you'd love to see him. I love Ronnie Stanley, not in Chicago though, because Ronnie Stanley has too much of an injury history, especially in the last few years. Yeah. He's like another Tevin Jenkins at this point. He doesn't see the field enough.
Yes and no. Ronnie Stanley is a superior player to Tevin Jenkins.
Absolutely
superior. He's a phenomenal left tackle. I agree with you. He's got some issues injury-wise, but the biggest pushback I can give on Ronnie Stanley is I don't think there's any way Baltimore lets him go. I just don't see that happening. So I would love him, Jay Grizz. I think the injury history is definitely a concern. But I think there's some. If you guys ask me today, like, and if I had to make a prediction, what they're going to have going into week 1 of the season, I think it's going to be throughout the training camp. There's going to be a competition at left tackle between Braxton Jones and Karan Angaji. I don't think they're going to bring in a significant left tackle unless they draft one early. Which
doubt it.
I'll explain why I don't think that's going to happen later. But I think, especially as far as a left tackle, anyways. I just think that it makes more sense to let these guys duke it out. They have another year to do this. They can address it next year if they have to. The thing is that I just don't know that there's a guy at the top of this draft that you're like, I got to have him right now. The one guy you would think would be maybe Will Campbell, but there's some concern about whether his arm length is going to be sufficient or not. So that's something that's why I told you guys earlier, I was hoping that they would have those measurables before tonight so we could talk about it more. But I anticipate he's going to come in below 33-inch arms. I don't know that for sure, but if he does, there's no way he's playing tackle for the Bears, at least in my opinion. They've just not done that in the past 3 years. There's only
one left tackle in the NFL that's got No, actually, no. I don't think anybody has sub 33
We're all
arms.
33 at least, I think.
Yeah.
We're all at least 33. And that's kind of like the marker is like anything below 33 is a no-no. You really want 34 or more. But I think there are a couple guys who have 33-inch arms that, like Rashawn Slater is an example. He's really damn good. But, there's not very many guys like that. There's only a couple of them. Everybody else, the good players all have that length. So I just think that, I mean, sure, is there a chance because he's got really good tape? Yeah, I think he could play tackle. I just don't know that that's the kind of guy, because of the fact that the Bears have been so it hasn't happened historically for them in the past 3 years. They have not gone after guys that didn't meet those thresholds, at least especially with premium capital. So I just don't see that. I mean, maybe. I mean, I wouldn't hate it because he's a good player. He really is. And you give him every chance to start at left tackle. And if he can't do it, he plays guard. But I just think, again, I think we're more likely to see Jones and Amagaji battle it out for that spot. And then because can you really replace 4 out of 5 positions on the offensive line? That's tough to do. They already got to do 3 as it is. So that's just my thoughts on it. I wouldn't be opposed to an upgrade there. I don't think Braxton's a long-term answer, but again, I just think that there's less likely for that to happen. And Maddie, I did want to thank you again for your super chat here. This is awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. And you got a good point here. Roshar will make these guys play smart physical, the new O-line coach. He's got a history as a good offensive line coach and getting guys to play a certain style. So I think he's going to bring that with him. And I think that it's important that Ben Johnson obviously has coached good offensive lines in his past 2 with Detroit. Mm-hmm. Their minds had to think alike when they hired Roshar. Obviously they did. So I think this is going to work out well. I really do. And I do think that they're going to do some different things though. I can't remember who it was. Somebody I was listening to earlier was talking about how teams have a tendency to just, like the Bears were an outside zone run team. They have a tendency to just kind of like run their outside zone, and teams kind of like they start to catch on to that. Like defenses start to kind of figure out a way to stop it because that's what they do. So
it was Ben Johnson.
I don't remember.
It was on Waddle and Sylvie, I think.
Yeah. It was either Johnson straight from the horse's mouth or somebody talking about Ben Johnson, how they anticipated he was going to come in and switch things up and do more than just that. He would run some duo or some gap scheme stuff to switch it up with the way they were running the football. And it makes a ton of sense. Obviously you're more versatile and now you're opening yourself up to like different offensive linemen as well. So I'm going to be interested to see how their profile changes at the position. I'm going to be interested to see if they still really lean more towards those guys who have that athletic ability, especially in the interior, or if they start leaning a little more towards those guys who have that strength, who have that mass, who are really going to move people. I'm going to be interested to see that. So
I do think on the interior, that is the direction they're going to go.
I think that they're still going to have an importance on being able that movement skill. Okay.
But this is why I've got the perfect combination of size and freaky athleticism and how he moves at guard. Want to guess who it is? Draft pick or draft prospects. I'm sorry. Prospect. Take a wild guess.
Draft prospect. Early round guy?
Yep. First round guy.
Oh, Membo.
Yes.
Yeah, Membo. I like Membo a lot.
Guys, I keep talking about him. I know I keep talking about him, but he is the perfect fit for what Ben Johnson wants to do here and what Ryan Poles has brought in thus far as offensive linemen go. And he's just a really good football player. I say it all the time, but he is. He's a really good football player. In my opinion, he's the best offensive lineman in this draft. He's going to come in. He's going to plug and play starter right there. And he's played tackle. He can play guard. He's probably going to be a guard because he's only 6'3", but I'm telling you guys, he's a good one. But I want to piggyback off you real quick, Jeff, because you were talking about that left tackle position. And guys, I got to be honest. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I don't see a tackle prospect in this draft or in free agency for that matter, proven guys, that I want to bring in here. because maybe in a later round of the draft, but the early rounds, the first round, second round, especially in the first round, we don't even know who can play tackle. Simmons, in my opinion, is probably the best tackle in the first round, but the knee is a super concerning thing at a tackle position. I know the ACL thing. We've talked about this ad nauseum over the last couple weeks. I know ACLs aren't as big of a deal anymore, but it's an offensive lineman at tackle. That's a lot of weight to try to anchor on a knee.
Here's the thing: is it may not be a long-term concern necessarily, but I just don't think the Bears, for instance, can afford.
They
take
can't.
a gamble on a guy who's been
They got to have a starter right here, right now.
I've mentioned this before, especially with the whole situation last year with Karan. He was drafted, and he wasn't anywhere near ready.
That's where I want to finish my point. That was where I was going with this. Is you have to give him an opportunity to see what he can do. You didn't get a chance to do that last year, and that's not his fault. You drafted him knowing he had an injury. They knew there was a possibility that this could be a redshirt season for him. You have to give him it. You have to let those two battle it out. They brought him in for competition purposes last year to compete with Braxton. You have to give him that opportunity at this point, especially knowing that he was injured when you drafted him. So to me, let's see what Karan can do. Maybe he's a guard. We don't know. J2K is a firm believer that he's a Pro Bowl guard in the future. I don't know that. I don't know if he can play guard. I don't know. I know that he has exceptional traits for a left tackle, that even more so than Braxton, because he's got, as Greg says, he's got the rear end for it, whereas Braxton doesn't have the rear end. But again, you've got to give him an opportunity and see what he can do. Maybe he comes out of camp as the starter at left tackle, and you've got Braxton Jones in reserve role, or maybe he plays guard. We don't know.
I think here's my take on, and I'll make this quick. Here's my take on Amagaji. I think he was thrust into a situation last year because of injuries that he was nowhere near ready for. He was exposed. That's part of the problem. He wasn't healthy to start the year. They threw him into the fire at the start of the season because he had no time to practice in the offseason.
He had no camp.
So then they had injuries, and they had no choice but to throw the guy into the fire, and he was exposed, and it was unfortunate for him. Now, some guys fold in those situations. I don't think he's that kind of kid. I think he's going to be okay.
He actually, honestly, he got exposed, but he didn't look that bad. It wasn't like it was. He certainly took his lick, but yes.
But I will say that this is where I want to go back to what Maddie was talking about earlier, bringing in a guy like Roshar and a guy like Ben Johnson, who they might look at Amagaji and say, I can't wait to get my hands on this dude, because I don't know what the fuck they were doing last year on that offensive line, but they didn't know how to coach him. I do, and I'm going to do something with that guy.
Yes.
I think that there's a very serious possibility that's going to happen, or that has already.
You guys cannot tell me that Dan Roshar is looking at Braxton and Amagaji and their exceptional traits and saying, I can't work with these guys. There is no way he's saying he can't work with these guys. I mean, look what he just had. He just had a terrific left tackle that signed with Miami 2 years ago that was the big-time target for everybody. That's a Roshar guy. And again, can he possibly – because wasn't Armstead a fourth-round pick, if I'm not mistaken, or a fifth-round pick when he was drafted? Teron Armstead. If I'm not mistaken, he was a day 3 pick. I think maybe late day 2. He might have been a third-rounder. I think he was a 4-2. Again, and that's a Roshar guy. So we'll see. Maybe he can.
Ramczyk, they had a phenomenal line when he was there. I mean, the guy just
which Unger came from Seattle, but
my whole argument here, my whole point to this is he's got to be looking. And I agree with you, Tim. I think he looked at both those guys and he had to think to himself, I can get at least one of those guys playing at a Pro Bowl, All Pro level. I mean, look at those traits. They both have them. And Amagaji's are even more impressive than Braxton's.
That's what I'm saying. He's got the rear end.
I'm not going to say right now that Amagaji's going to go in and start week 1, but I think he's going to push him. And I think by the end of the season, there's a good chance that Amagaji is going to be starting at left tackle, either by injury or because he's just flat out beating him in practice, or beating him for the job, I should say. So we'll wait and see. Armstead, Bears Junkie says Armstead was a third rounder. We were close, or at least I was close.
I did say late day 2. I did say possibly third round. But anyways,
still, I mean, that's still a third round guy that they developed, and he's become a Pro Bowl level player, has been in his past anyways. So,
yep.
Again, I just think that's why I said before, I think that I tend to doubt that they're going to be looking to replace the left tackle position right now. And they might, I mean, if they see a guy who's a clear upgrade, I don't think that they would shy away from it. Like if they really think that Will Campbell is going to come over and be an all-pro left tackle, they probably draft him at 10. Again, though, I just the pushback that I have on that, as I told you guys before, is I really think the Bears are sticklers for that arm length thing. And they're going to, if he measures anywhere near anything below 33 at the combine, they're going to say no, at least in my opinion. So
I agree.
We'll see. There's a lot of people who look at him, like Brian Baldinger is a good example. This is an offensive line guy who knows his shit. He looks at him and says he thinks he can play left tackle. He doesn't really care about his arm length. His technique and everything else shows that this guy can do the job. And look, if I'm a team and I were to draft a guy, I'd give him every chance to play the position and see if he can't before I say he can't. However, again, the Bears, this is such a thing for them. Like if you guys, I told you guys about this a couple weeks ago, I think. There was a 1920 football drive segment. If you guys aren't familiar with that, it's the segment the Bears do on YouTube. It's like a series that they have where they kind of like bring you in behind the scenes so the fans can see things that go on behind closed doors. And they were talking about on one of these episodes, the Bears draft strategy. I think it was last year. And they had the draft board, not the draft board, but they had a board in the background during the segment in one of these clips where it was showing each position group and the things that they look for that are important in those position groups and importance, the number of importance for them. So in order from 1 through 5 or whatever the case may be. So for instance, like a receiver, it might have like speed or route running or yards after the catch or size or what, those all are going to be listed in there somewhere, right? For offensive line, guess what the number one credential was for offensive linemen, specifically tackles? Length. That tells me all I need to know. If that's the number one credential and you're looking at the number 10 pick in the draft, I highly doubt you're going to lean away from something that's so important to you unless you have serious conviction in that guy. Okay. So if they do take Will Campbell, I'm going to tell you guys this right now. If they do take Will Campbell, they got conviction in that guy. It's against the grain for them. So again,
well, and he's probably going to have at least 33-inch arms. I can tell you right now, there's not a single team in the NFL that's going to take a guy at 10 to play left tackle that has sub 33-inch arms. It's not going to happen. So unless he's got 33-inch arms, then if they have conviction, they would take him. But I'm telling you, I don't think there's a single player. There's not a single left tackle. There's one left tackle that's under 6'4", one, and that he's a Pro Bowler. So it's not going to happen. What's that?
It's probably Slater.
I think it is Slater, actually. I think it is Slater. I think you're right. But regardless, the point – but then look who they drafted last year, who's 6'8", Joe Alt, because they want a guy with length. And that's in L.A.
Well, he's one of the better left tackle prospects we've seen, too. In in
a long time. He's very good. Yeah, and he had an excellent rookie year, too. Excellent rookie year. But, look, there was somebody who made a point in here about attacking left tackle in next year's draft, and I agree. I think it's going to be – they're going to wait to attack that. Maybe one of these guys turns out to be Pro Bowl caliber, and we don't have to worry about it next year. But I do believe –
before you continue, one point here. Bears Junkie makes a point. He says he's not big on the tackle class this year. The one he likes was hurt, but he thinks the rest of them are future guards. I want to agree with your second point there, Bears Junkie. I think a lot of those tackle prospects we're looking at are future guards, especially a lot of those first-round guys. Again, that arm length thing is a real thing, guys. It's a real thing, and a lot of these guys that are high-end prospects don't have that arm length threshold, or they don't have the height, or they don't have the athleticism. They're missing something.
Talked about that
that causes people to think that they're going to get pushed inside. And there's a lot of really good interior offensive line prospects in this draft, especially between like the 20 to 60 range, I think. So that's why I think they're way more likely to attack that area and let Braxton and Karan duel it out for that left tackle job. So
yeah, that's what we've been saying here for a couple weeks now, is that the guards are there. I know these guys are on they're tackles on the draft board, but they're not tackles. I mean, even Membo, who's got 33-plus-inch arms, but he's only 6'3", so he's probably playing guard. We don't think Will Campbell it's believed that he has sub 33-inch arms, And who's the other one? Not Simmons. Simmons is a left tackle, but that's the health is the concern there. Banks, thank you. He's the other one. He's also
Banks got short arms.
Sub 33.
I mean, looking at his length too, and he's a guy I like Banks, but like I feel like he had some rough games, especially in some big moments, and that kind of concerns me a little bit. He's a good player. I just don't know if he's the guy you want to, like your guy you're going to take at 10. And again, this is another thing I want to mention. We've mentioned this many times in the past too. I really think if they have a suitor, the Bears are going to do their best to move down the first round.
I agree.
And accrue extra capital to get another pick in that 20 to 60 range. Because number one, I don't know if there's a guy at number 10 that they're going to be screaming and jumping on the table to get. And
I don't imagine there is.
They can probably find a guy in that, later on in the first round, in that middle of the first round area that they like a lot. And they still, acquire an extra pick probably in round 2, maybe another pick in that on day 2 to help them in that 20 to 60 range, like I said. So that's just my thoughts. And I don't want to spend too much more time on it, but like I said, guys, I think that it makes a lot of sense. And Foster, I'm going to bring up your point right now because I think everybody agrees interior O-line is the biggest issue on the team still, and it needs to be fixed. And, and that's why I think that the thing is people were making a ruckus about Pohl's comments the other day. He was telling somebody, it was an interview he was doing with somebody that they were ready to spend on the offensive line. And people are just asking like, well, why weren't you ready to spend before? I think they've always been ready. I think it's a matter of they didn't know if there was guys that they liked enough to do it. And I will say that I do think that there were opportunities both in the draft and in free agency for them to address the offensive line issues they've had that they didn't, because they opted to go in other directions, and those were mistakes. So I think
and let's be fair. Let's also be fair. Ryan Poles leaves a lot of player acquisition to his coaches. And maybe Chris Morgan said, I don't like this guy, or I really like this guy. I want you to bring him in. At the end of the day, if the coach says, I can't work with that guy, they're not going to bring him in. So maybe it came to the point where these are guys that he liked, and so they brought them in, and it came, maybe Chris Morgan thought, well, I can develop this guy, and it just didn't work out that way because, I'm not so sure that he was a great developmental coach. I still don't think he is. But that is going to play a part in this and a factor in this. So maybe they had guys they did want to go get, but they didn't because of the coaching staff. And this is obviously a totally different coaching staff. Ben Johnson has the type of offensive lineman he probably tends to like more than others. We don't know. We don't know what he actually likes. We just know what they had in Detroit. So it's going to depend on that. That's certainly an important factor here that we have to think about. But
I do expect a variance from what they've done.
I do too. I 100% expect that. Yes, and he's the type of coach, and he's made it known multiple times now that he's going to adapt what he does to what he has. And that's something that we haven't had here. They specifically look for a certain type of player with certain traits to bring in for the longest time that we can remember now. This is what they've wanted to do, especially in the Ryan Poles era with Matt Eberflus. They had a certain type of player they wanted to bring in at each position, and that's what they did. They didn't deviate from that very much because they wanted to play to the schemes that they had on offense and defense. So it's going to depend. But I kind of want to shift gears here a little bit, Jeff, because I want to get into this before we get towards the end of the show here. But guard, obviously, go ahead.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I just want to finish this last thing about Braxton Jones, because the guy does get a bit of a bad rap for, obviously he's not a perfect tackle. Okay, guys, he is an average left tackle. He was a 5th round draft pick. That's something we have to consider here.
I would actually push back a little. I think he's above average. I think he's a little bit above average.
A little above average. The biggest issue with him is his anchor, and we know he has a hard time handling the bull rush. He's a good run blocker. He's a pretty good pass protector when he's not getting hit with the bull rush that he can't handle. But he does have issues with handling that. And both B-Shep made a good point about it, asking why people have been so hard on him and why people pick on him so much, that a lot of his mistakes were probably exaggerated a little bit. And they are to an extent. I think it's more it's less of his mistakes being exaggerated, more people picking on him or being harder on him than they would be another player, because of the fact that, it's the Bears and they've had some issues with sack totals. So that was one comment. Who made the other comment in here? Let's see if I can find it real quick. here we go. MC Fact. The film shows he's just not above average at sealing off the blind side. Pocket is tended to collapse from left side. It's basically exactly what I just said. The pocket collapses because he just doesn't have a great anchor.
I will make this point. I want to make one point before we get off of it too. If I'm being totally honest, I think we've reached the ceiling of Braxton Jones, just because. And Maddie mentions in here, Braxton, if he can get the bull rush figured out, he'll be fine. But
that's the problem.
That's what I was going to say. He doesn't. If, like Greg says, he doesn't have the butt. He doesn't have the rear end for that to anchor properly. Whereas I think Karan has all of the traits and all of the ability to do that because he has the frame, the length, and he's got the rear end to play the left tackle position and really anchor down. So,
well, let me just make one. So I know we're trying to move on from this, but it's just a quick thing here, guys. So for most of you that know, Tim and I have a background in wrestling. Tim's the head coach at an Indiana high school right now, and we've seen our fair share of really good high school wrestlers, college wrestlers, whatever. Our cousin was a national champion, so we've seen our fair share of good wrestling, especially big guys too. So when I look at good offensive line play, a lot of times I see guys who know what you're talking about is rear end, Tim, and I don't think a lot of people understand what that means. What it means is not so much you look at the guy's butt, how big it is. It's whether the guy knows how to get his butt down and get leverage and get underneath himself to provide that proper anchor and to be able to out leverage the other guy. Wrestlers are really, really, really good at understanding that, especially the big wrestlers who are good and end up becoming offensive linemen. So that's why you see a lot of times these guys who won high school state championships and are offensive linemen like Zach Frazier, they end up being pretty damn good players because they understand that leverage. They understand how to get up underneath guys like that and prevent that strength from bearing down on them like that. Braxton Jones doesn't understand that. He doesn't. You can tell clearly that he doesn't understand the concept of getting his butt down and getting his weight underneath him. He has an issue with that for whatever reason. Some guys just play tall, and some wrestlers are the same way. They just wrestle tall. Some guys have an issue just getting down like that for whatever reason. It happens. That's just the kind of player he is at this point, I think. So that's why I said earlier, I don't think he's a long-term answer. I think that he's a guy. He's probably going to be the starter this year if Amagaji doesn't beat him out at some point. But I don't know that he's the long-term solution. I just don't know that there's a guy in this draft at the top of the draft that you're like, he's my left tackle of future. I don't know that. And I just gave my reasons why earlier. So let's move along.
Before we go on, I want to not piggyback that point, but by the way, guys, another position of need that we've talked about many times. I don't think he's going to be available when the Bears pick, but we're talking about, interior defensive line as well. Mason Graham, wrestling background, very good one at that too. One guy I really want. I'm trying to find his actual high school record. There is another wrestler in the draft. I cannot find who it is, but he was also like an four-time undefeated state champion wrestler, and I can't remember his.
There's a handful of wrestlers in this draft.
Before I know we've probably beaten you guys with this many times, but I'm telling you, you can 100% tell which guys in the NFL have wrestling backgrounds, and they're more times than not, they're the best players in the NFL because those guys have a gas tank. They are a relentless motor. They're strong they're balanced, very well balanced.
It's all part of wrestling.
Yes, that's all wrestling stuff. And guys, I'm telling you, go ask the guys you can't really ask them, but go read stuff from guys who have wrestling backgrounds that have played the NFL, and they will tell you that wrestling is the best thing that you can do for football. So if you have any kids who want to play football or have aspirations to play football, get them into wrestling. 100%.
It's probably the best thing you can do for them anyways.
75%. 75% of my wrestlers play football. And a lot of them, their coach tells them to go wrestle because it only helps them with football. So I'm telling you guys, it's a big deal.
Especially in the trenches.
Yes.
Especially in the trenches. So that's just, look, guys, I mean, we could go on all day about wrestling because that's our background, but I just like Tim said, there's a correlation between guys who are legitimate wrestlers, who are good wrestlers and end up being good football players because they understand things differently. They have a different mindset about things. And wrestlers, not just the correlation technically, because there is some technique correlation there, as I mentioned earlier, but also it's just like wrestlers are so disciplined. There's just things that wrestlers have to endure, things that they do that are different from other athletes. It's an individual sport. You're all on your own. You're the only one who has to make weight for your weight class and on your team and in your varsity lineup or whatever. It's all about you on the mat in your moment. you are a part of whether your team does well or not, because you're going to score points or you're not going to score points for your team. So it's just one of those things where, again, the discipline is the biggest part, because, I mean, I don't think anybody realizes just how hard cutting weight is unless they actually do it. Mm-hmm. It's just one of those things where they understand how to play the game more efficiently because of their background, because of what they've learned through wrestling. And I think that goes for a lot of sports outside of just football, but it just teaches you a lot about life and about other sports and about your body and how to physically perform better athletically and whatnot. So it's a great thing for kids. And I agree with you, Tim. If you guys have kids, get them into wrestling. It's a good thing for them, either for other sports or just to learn life lessons or whatever. It's such a good thing for you. It's tough sport. You got to be tough to be a wrestler. Mm-hmm. So, anyways, guys, we're kind of running out of time here. We don't have a whole bunch left, and I want to get into some of the questions you have. We didn't have a lot of time to talk.
We got to get into one other topic before we get there. We got to get into some center talk, because that's the last part of the interior offensive line that honestly may have been our worst position in the interior offensive line over the last, 3 years. So there's a couple names to look at. Everybody's talked about Drew Dahlman, obviously. And at the beginning of at the beginning of the offseason, it was Trey Smith and Drew Dahlman or bust. That was the thought process with everybody with this Bears team. But he's certainly my favorite of the free agents available. He's the best one available, and I don't really think it's that close. I've discussed Ryan Kelly on here over the last couple weeks as well. Maybe it was last week or the week before. I can't remember. But I definitely mentioned Ryan Kelly being somebody I would look at. He's older, so he probably doesn't have. Obviously, he's not going to play at the same level. He doesn't have a lot of time left, but that'd be a perfect person to bring in to groom another center that you bring in the draft. There's a couple other names.
I love Zabel. Zabel's my guy.
I know.
I need the Bears to draft Zabel and move him to center. Let him be your center of the future. I don't know if he's going to be a day one starter. He probably could be a guard, maybe even at center. I don't know, but it's one of those things where I think he obviously got some reps at center at the Senior Bowl. I think he's a guy who teams see as a potential center. I love him. He reminds me a lot of Graham Barton last year, a guy who played tackle in college and then moved to center in the NFL. There's a chance he could go in the first round, but man, if he's there at 39 or 41, or the Bears get another second round pick, I hope to God they take this guy, because I think he's got future center written all over him.
And he played center in high school, so he's got some experience there. Granted, it wasn't at the college level, and we've also seen that North Dakota State kind of still, not to the degree of Notre Dame, but North Dakota State's had some success with some offensive linemen over the last few years, so they must be doing something right over there too. I don't know if they got something in their Campbell soup or what it is, but they've got something down there. Or up there.
Maddie's got a point about Zabel. He says he's interesting, but the small school worries me. The pushback I would give on that, Maddie, is he went to the Senior Bowl and he was dominating. He was winning one-on-one reps, and he played well throughout the week. So,
and also what I just said too, they've had success at North Dakota State recently with offensive linemen. So it's not,
it is a small school, but there's guys have translated not to NFL players, and not only just that, but again, when he's competing at the Senior Bowl against the other top prospects in the draft, and he's beating them. I think that should say something. And like Cliff says, he's the practice player of the week. That's a big deal.
I don't even know if I would say that North Dakota State's a small school, because they've dominated the FCS landscape for the better part of 20 years now, and they churn out NFL talent pretty frequently. Yes, it is. Excuse me, but they churn out a lot of NFL talent. So, but it's not like they don't have guys coming out.
The issue, Tim, though, is like Maddie was saying, they don't play that elite level competition. They don't play in the SEC and whatnot. They play smaller time schools who don't have those kind of players on their teams. Now, again, though, like I said, when you go to the Senior Bowl and you play as well as he did, that tells me he's going to translate. So, anyways, that's what I hope to see. I hope to see them draft a guy for sure. Zabel's my guy. I think that they can't just walk out of free agency without addressing the center position at all. I think they actually have to try something there, try to get somebody in there, whether it's a 1-year deal or a long-term guy. But they can't just walk into free agency and hope they're going to draft their center of the future. They have to do something. Double down for all I care. They should have done that a long time ago with some of these guys. So that's just my thoughts on it. James, James thinks that Zabel's going to have an above average career. I think so too. I think he's perfect in that 39 to 41 range where the Bears have those picks. I think that's a perfect spot for him.
He just sounds like a football player. He sounds like Ray Zabel. I mean, he just sounds like a good football player. You know, that's a cool name to have. Not that the name matters. I mean, at the end of the day, let's face reality. The probably the greatest or second greatest linebacker of all time, his name is Dick Butkus. So I mean, names don't necessarily mean much, but I guess with a name like Dick Butkus, you better be really good at football, or you're probably going to get picked on your whole life. So I don't know, but I mean, yeah, I agree with you. He looked very good in the Senior Bowl. I would definitely be interested in bringing him in. I would not be opposed to that at all. I don't think you'd want to teach him early, but if he's available in the second round, you take him.
I think he's my favorite player in this entire draft. I will shit my pants if they draft him.
I don't know if I have a favorite, but there's a lot of guys I really like. But another guy to mention, I don't know if I like it so much, but Greg Gabriel's a big fan of his. I believe he mentioned him earlier today, is Evan Brown. I'm not sure. And really that was because of the connection with Ben Johnson. Obviously, for the 2 years he spent in Detroit with Ben Johnson. That's another name to talk about. And that's a possibility. Just because he's been with Ben Johnson, he understands the not the scheme, but the calls, the protections, all of that under that offense. So
who are you talking about?
Evan Brown. Oh. So it's a possibility there. That would actually probably make the most sense. If you're not going to bring in a Dahlman, you would bring in somebody like Evan Brown who can teach a rookie that you're bringing in that. So, but I think if it's not Drew Dahlman, I think if you bring in one of those other guys, you have to bring in a rookie center. You have to bring somebody in to develop and to train under the acting center. But Dahlman, I don't think is a long-term answer either, but I do believe he's probably here for 2 or 3 years before you need to bring in a rookie center to develop underneath him. So, but yeah,
I don't think this guy's a long-term answer either, but I assume he's a backup player regardless, and I don't know if they see him as being able to start. But does anybody know? Does Dan Skipper can he play center? Because he's another guy who's in Detroit who I could see coming over to at least be a depth piece on this offensive line with Ben Johnson. He can come in and be that fullback guy and catch a pass, possibly catch a touchdown pass like he did in Detroit. So again, that's another guy like Zeitler who's familiar with the offense, who's familiar with the coach, who understands how he wants to do things. He makes perfect sense to bring in. I just want to know if he can play center. Does anybody know that? So if you guys find out, let me know. But other than that, like I said, I didn't say this, but we have plenty of time to talk about this stuff. There's still free agency is still not even here yet. So once that happens, once we have a better idea of what they've done in free agency in the draft or free agency, we can have a better idea of what they might do with the draft. But I do think like I said before, I think that they're gonna attack the interior offensive line in free agency, and I think they're gonna double down in the draft, the best that they can. I think they're gonna attack it hard. So I think they have to. I think that's the only way that they can really assure themselves of fixing this thing, because like I said before, they've got at least 3 interior offensive line or 3 positions on the offensive line that they have to fix. So that's just they have to refill, I should say. They have to get new guys there. So the problem is I don't know that, and I said this before, I don't think you're gonna refill 4 positions on the O-line. I think 3 is enough as it is. So I think they're going to continue with the competition on the left side between Braxton and
made a good point.
They're going to try to attack the interior on both free agency and the draft. So
you see Ant misses point in here. Pace will overpay Dahlman, so the doesn't even get a chance,
He's already in Atlanta, so he might not have to overpay him too much.
That's what he's saying. Pace will already overpay him, so.
There's a rumor out there that he wants to stick around Atlanta. I don't know how true that is either. It's another one of those things where it's not like a viable reporter source, so who knows. So anyways, we're running out of time, guys. It's a great show tonight. Let's get to some of these questions we have in here. And again, Maddie, before I answer these questions in here, I want to thank you again so much for your super chats. We really appreciate your support of the show. We appreciate you being here and listening and providing whatever you have to say to the show. It also helps to drive us. So we thank you for your donation. We thank you for your support. So getting into some of these questions here, B. Shep wants to know, what's the chance Poles drafts a kicker this year? I think there's a good chance, Shep. The reason I say that is, well, I shouldn't say there's a good chance. There is a chance, though. I think there's a chance because obviously we all know that Cairo has issues kicking anything beyond 50 yards. That's an obvious issue in this day and age. I don't know. I don't really know that it's a good idea to have a kicker who can't kick beyond 50 yards today. So
I don't think it's going to happen.
He's not the long-term solution. He's here right now. He's been a good kicker inside of that distance, a really good kicker inside of that distance. It would depend to me on a couple things. Number one, are there several kickers in this draft that you like? Is there one kicker in this draft that you like in particular? Are you willing to do what you did last year and use an early day three pick on a kicker or a place kicker or a punter or whatever, a special teamer like you did with Torrey Taylor, because you have conviction in that guy? I think that would be – I don't know that they're in a spot to do that right now because they have so many other needs and things didn't work out last year like they anticipated them to. I think if they could go back and they didn't know that Taylor was going to be as good as he was last year, if we could go back in time and the Bears knew they weren't going to be a good team, they might not make that pick. So that'll be interesting to see for me. I think they could, because like I said, they could get a potential long-term answer there. I think that's still something that they need. However, the only reason I think that they might not do that is if they draft a kicker this year, you're almost certainly moving on from Cairo because you're not going to keep two kickers on your roster. So if they draft a kicker, they better think he's the guy right now. So I don't know that that's going to be the case. And we'll have to see what happens. We'll have to see who some of the better kickers. I need to look into this. I haven't looked at any of the kickers in the draft class, so I can't tell you if there's any that are any good or not. I'd have to look into that for you guys. And I'll do that more in the future so I can see if anybody makes sense potentially for the Bears late day three. But what do you think, Tim?
0% chance. Not happening. And this is my opinion, but you're forgetting a couple important factors here. Number one, I agree with you. The distance thing is a little bit of a problem. Most kickers now, if not all other kickers, are kicking, 60 plus yards. Cairo is not doing that. But one thing you're failing to mention is Cairo is excellent in the Chicago elements. Look at what they've tried to do multiple times after Robbie Gould left. They let go of Robbie Gould, couldn't find a guy that could kick in the weather until they found Cairo Santos. So that's a huge deal. And not to mention the way this offense is now, especially with Ben Johnson here, if you're inside of midfield, you're probably going for it on 4th and short. You're not kicking the field goal anymore. So it's not as big of a deal, I think, in Chicago to kick that 50 or 60 plus yard field goal. You don't need a kicker that can do that necessarily. But also you got to remember, it doesn't matter what kicker you bring into Chicago. If he can kick 75 yards, doesn't matter. When the elements are the way they are, that's not going to matter as much because they're not going to be kicking 75-yard field goals with the weather the way it is and the wind the way that it is. 75-yard field goals, but I was using that. I was exaggerating intentionally, making my point that it doesn't matter how big of a leg they have.
I do
when
get
the weather
your point.
Conditions do matter.
I think Cliff makes a good point that a UDFA kicker to give him some competition makes sense. I do
that
think
last
they'll bring in a UDFA kicker. The thing is just I don't know if you're going to find a UDFA kicker that beats him out for the job. But
they tried that. I think it was actually
fine, but
I think it was 2 years ago they brought in a UDFA, and within like a week they cut him. Like it was clear that Cairo was the better kicker.
I mean, they're not going to keep two kickers on the roster going into week one. Obviously, once they get trimmed down to the 53, there's only going to be one. So I think they'll have one through camp. I think they'll bring in a guy to compete with him. Sure, why not? I mean, it doesn't hurt anything. It's just, whether they get and there are a lot of UDFA kickers like Foster says. I agree with you on that. Whether or not it's the guy that, takes over the job remains to be seen. I think it makes sense to bring one in, let him compete for the job. I just don't know that it's worth investing the draft capital and that they could. I just don't know that they will because, like I said before, Cairo is not the long-term answer, obviously. So we'll see. But is it a need right this minute that they got to correct? There's so many other needs on this team right now that are way more pressing that I'm not sure that kicker makes the most sense to try to.
Well, and you have a kicker that has sustained success in the NFL. You're not going to take it. You're not going to get rid. Let me rephrase that. You're not going to use a draft pick when you have so many needs to replace a player who is already above average at his position. Actually, more than above average. He's probably one of the best 10 kickers in football because of his accuracy. He doesn't miss. He's a very good kicker.
Yeah. I like Kairos inside of 50. He's money, but again, like the length or the leg strength is a concern. I mean, like he's not going to be the guy forever. So
By the way, if we're not finished polling yet, I certainly won that argument. So go ahead and jot down your check mark for me in the poll there.
We'll get to that in a minute. But there's one more question here from James. He mentions that he understands wanting to secure the line, but why can we not do it like the Rams, no-name line, and a non-mobile quarterback, one drive from being in the Super Bowl, maybe the coaching or maybe the off. Well, there's a couple things here, James. Number one, the Rams have probably the best head coach in the entire league, number one. Number two, they have one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the entire league, arguably one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the entire league, whether he's mobile or not. He's a phenomenal player. So even with an offensive line that's not great, he's going to have answers to getting the ball out for the most part. Another thing there to consider is I don't want to be a team that's close and doesn't get there. The teams that win championships have elite level offensive lines. Philadelphia Eagles, elite level offensive line. They just played the Chiefs, who have a very goddamn good offensive line. Pardon my language. A very damn good offensive line. And that's with no tackle. They had no left tackle in the Super Bowl. Okay. They've been playing with Joe Tooney out of position for a while. So I just feel like they need to be better. I'm not going to be satisfied with being just that good with some no-name guys. I think they need to do what the best teams do, which is invest significant draft capital and free agency assets into top flight guys. You use top 10 picks, top 25 picks, first round draft picks in general. Use them on offensive linemen, on trench players, on defensive linemen, guys who are going to get the job done in there. And that's how you should be building a team, is from the inside out in the first place. The Bears started outside in, so now they have no choice. They got to finish it off there. So I just think that, again, I wouldn't want to settle for being just good enough. And yeah, they've got some pretty good players, but they've invested some good capital there too, and they've developed their guys well. The Rams have. Steve Avila was a guy that I liked a lot in the draft a couple of years ago. I think he made a lot of sense for the Bears as a center prospect. And he's a good player for the Rams. So I don't know.
Well, you got to remember when they started building that offensive line in LA, they had guys like Andrew Whitworth that were there that helped develop those guys and were, longtime veteran players. Very good. By the way, Andrew Whitworth was a wrestler. When you have that there, so yeah, they may not be well-known names right now, but those guys developed under well-known names and great players in the past. So as much as I agree with you that you can do that with no-name guys, you have to have, if they're no-name guys, you have to have 5 good guys in the offensive line and probably 1 or 2 studs. You can't have weaknesses like that. If you have a bunch of average no-name guys, you can't have any weaknesses. You can't have injuries. You have to stay healthy. That's asking for a lot, number one. And number two, we've seen it now twice over the last few years. If you want to compete for those Super Bowls, Kansas City had some injuries on that offensive line. They had a guard playing tackle. It looked really bad. Their tackles were really bad in that game. A few years back, yeah, Cincinnati made it to the Super Bowl with that offensive line, but when it came down to it, that Chiefs defensive line was just way too much for them to handle, and they lost. So, I agree with the sentiment that it's possible to do that, but you got to have some studs. You got to have at least 1 or 2 guys that, look at Detroit's offensive line. It was solid. But they've got Penei Sewell, 1 stud, and Frank Ragnow, 1 stud, and then they just kind of built it around that. So to me, I agree with you, but you got to have some studs. You got to have some multipliers on that line, and it starts outside in. So we got to continue to build that thing up. I think you got your bookends, at least for this season. You got to work on that interior, bring in at least one veteran free agent, and then go from there. But that's just my one. Well, I'm saying you got to at least bring in one, and you got to draft some others. So we'll see what happens. But I agree. I think you got to take at least 1 guard and at least 1 center in free agency. You have to.
You just got to attack it. You got to double down and try to get it right. They've just missed for far too long. You can't fuck around with it anymore. You got your quarterback in the future. You got to protect this guy. So I just think that, at this point, it's a good problem to have if you have 2 guys who can do the job. Who cares? Do it. Look what the Falcons just did the same thing. Now, whether or not it's a smart move or not is another story. When they signed Kirk Cousins, that big deal, and then they drafted Penix. they doubled down because they wanted to get the position right. I don't know if they made the right move there per se, but I think in the situation that the Bears have here, you know, take a swing in free agency and you can draft a guy too, you should do that. Just do it. Get it fixed. So if you guys have been paying attention in here, Aldo mentioned that there's – but actually before I say this, I want to mention real quick, Cliff, you made a really funny reference in here about that movie, the garbage picking, field goal kicking Philadelphia phenomenon. I remember that movie from when I was young.
Disney movie.
And if I remember right, yeah, it was a Disney movie. And if I remember right, Tony Danza in that movie, when they wasn't like an NFL coach or something was watching him kick empty water jugs or something.
Yes.
I don't know how anybody can
see water jugs. Yes.
Water jug. But in any case, he was kicking the piss out of them water jugs.
Yep.
Oh man, that was a good movie.
There was a scene where he makes it on the team, and one of the other Eagles players looks at him. He's like, "Where'd you go to college? PU?" Because he's a garbage man.
It was funny, man. I mean, it wasn't. I can't remember. I almost forgot
that line. I don't know why.
So, anyways, guys, like I said before, I was getting ready to say before, Aldo had a little thing for you guys to vote on in here between Tim and I, who had the better show, I guess. So, I mean, I don't know if that's even really a question. So, I don't know why we're even leaving it up to a vote here, because we all know the answer. But let's see. I won last week. So, who won the show between me or Tim? Ooh, we got a dead.
How does no one win? There's got to be a winner.
There's no one. Someone has to win.
Talk about a tough crowd.
Hi, I don't get that. I mean, if there could be nothing more twin than us tying in a fucking vote on our show right now. So I think that is absolutely hilarious that you guys voted us on a tie there. Oh, the win goes to Jimi Hendrix, though, and according to Cliff. Thank you, Jimmy, or thank you, Cliff. We all know
Five-finger death punch. Come on.
Five-finger death punch. I'm sorry, but nothing about five-finger death punch can touch the genius that is.
Foster said I was winning until the last vote.
Well, you still didn't. So sorry to hear.
You didn't win either.
But guess what? I just took over because of Cliff. Thanks a lot, Cliff.
No, it doesn't count.
Sure it is.
Somebody else may have said me, but they didn't say anything. You never know.
He's giving me the win. He just voted.
You don't just get the win. It wasn't in the vote. Just because he says it in the chat don't mean it counts.
Well, you think what you want, Tim, but I'm the
champ. See? It's still there. Look at that, buddy. Look at the graphic. You didn't win.
Well,
as a matter of fact, I'm 1-0-1 over the last 2 weeks. So you're still a loser.
I win, thanks to Cliff. So thank you, Cliff, for bringing me victory over Tim. Usually it's just I don't really need help for the most part usually, but I'll take the help in this scenario. I appreciate you for that. But anyways, guys, it was a funny show. It was a good show. I appreciate you guys all being here. There were some comments in this chat. You guys had me rolling for a while there, so I do appreciate the good laugh. B-Shep, no. The award does not go to the one who was born first because Tim sucker punched me on the way out of the womb, and that's cheating.
Here we go. Here we go.
Cannot win according to those rules.
You're just a sore loser that you lost at that too. So let's not go.
I do not affiliate politically, so don't put anything on me there. In any case, like I said, guys, we appreciate you guys all being here. Like I said, it was a great show tonight. You guys had me rolling for a while there, so. You guys do such a good job helping us to drive the show. Please continue to come back and join us on Friday nights and help us with every show. And we'll do our best to answer all your questions and provide content for you guys. So before we go, just a quick reminder, as always, guys, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you don't already, you can find us at Barroom Network, wherever you get your podcasts, whether it be YouTube or Spotify or Apple, however you do that. You can also follow us all on X or Twitter. You can follow our executive producer Aldo Gandia at Barroom Network. He is the man and the podfather, and he is behind all of this content on this network. So let's give a big shout out and thank you to Aldo for that. You can also follow me at _Jeff Willis. You can follow Tim here at Tim Willis 24. And until next week, guys, bear down.
Got Bears.
The Willis Twin Towers podcast is a Barroom Network production. Jeff and Tim Willis are the co-hosts and co-producers. Aldo Gandia is executive producer. Music is licensed from Pond 5. Any copyrighted material used was done under the Fair Use Doctrine for commentary, criticism, and informative purposes. All of our programming is available in audio-only format by subscribing to the Barroom Network wherever you download podcasts. Videos are archived on YouTube.